YouTube keeps recommending videos about freedom, most of which function as system adaptation mechanisms, sophisticated repackaging of captivity as liberation. This is quite annoying, so let's quickly deconstruct the dominant narratives. The philosophical discourse on freedom often opens with a peculiar maneuver, declaring freedom ultimately undefinable, while spending considerable effort defining it. This isn't paradox. It's a defense mechanism of the parasitic system. When a concept remains deliberately vague, it becomes immune to attack while remaining infinitely malleable for systemic use. Freedom means everything and nothing. Remarkably convenient, isn't it? Any interpretation becomes valid, which means no interpretation threatens the system. Ambiguity protects the narrative from deconstruction. Contemporary freedom discourse treats existentialist philosophy like Sartre, Camus, Kierkegaard as objective truth rather than one specific 20th century European interpretation. Freedom equals burden isn't a fact, it's a frame. Yet this frame gets accepted as bedrock and everything builds from there. Critical question: who benefits when freedom is perceived as curse rather than capacity? A system that requires people to fear autonomy. If freedom equals terror, then dependence equals comfort. The system protects itself through the host's fear of liberation. Consider Kierkegaard's dread, the horror of standing at a cliff edge, realizing nothing stops you from jumping. But what's actually terrifying isn't freedom itself, it's fear of responsibility. And where does that fear originate? From a system that conditions from childhood that error equals catastrophe, that choice equals risk of losing approval, resources, status. Kierkegaard describes the symptom but doesn't name the disease. Isaiah Berlin's distinction between freedom from and freedom to gets presented as a philosophical sophistication. But what if the dichotomy itself is a systemic trap? Freedom from becomes libertarian fantasy. Freedom to becomes nanny state. Both models keep you trapped in the frame that freedom equals what the system permits or provides. Where's the option for freedom equals dismantling the permission structure entirely? The typical narrative criticizes American obsession with negative freedom while acknowledging nuances of positive freedom, but never exits the binary. Stoicism gets packaged as ancient wisdom. You can't control external events, but you can control your response. Sounds profound until you recognize it as rationalized powerlessness. Epictetus was a slave who made philosophy from his captivity. My body is chained, but my mind is free. Great, but the fucking chains remain. When you can't change your material conditions, you philosophize that material conditions don't matter. Marcus Aurelius presents the opposite case and arrives at the same conclusion. He was an emperor with actual power to dismantle oppressive structures, yet preached the identical doctrine of internal control over external action. Whether you're at the bottom or top of the hierarchy, the prescription remains. Accept what you cannot change. This philosophy works perfectly for system preservation. The slave doesn't rebel. The emperor doesn't reform. Everyone stays in position. Buddhism follows the same pattern. Suffering comes from attachment. The problem isn't the system, it's your expectations. Don't change the world, change yourself. This is textbook systemic capture. Resistance energy gets redirected inward toward self-work rather than systemic challenge. Alan Watts offers another variation. There is no one left to be free. Beautiful, mystical, completely useless. This dissolves the problem into abstraction. If I is illusion, who suffers? Who liberates? This isn't an answer, it's evasion. Everything maintains the same frame. The problem is you, not the system. Freedom inevitably transforms into its opposite, gets repeated like a mantra. Yet it's a pattern. But why does it happen? What's the mechanism? Here's the mechanism. Any concept the system adopts becomes a tool of the system. Freedom becomes slogan because it benefits the system for people to believe they're free. As long as you feel free, you don't seek actual freedom. The discourse describes symptoms, algorithms, consumerism, debt slavery, but doesn't expose the capture mechanism. It's like saying you have a fever without naming the virus. The mechanism remains invisible. The standard critical narrative targets capitalism, social media, algorithms, political theater, all accurate, but this critique exists within the system. This is managed resistance. You can criticize the system as long as it doesn't threaten the system. And that critique gets packaged as comfortable spectacle. You consume it, nod along, feel intellectually satisfied, and nothing changes. Catharsis without action. The system approves. After extensive analysis of systemic capture, the typical conclusion arrives. Surrender. Don't fight. Accept. Let go. Real freedom is releasing the pursuit of freedom. Freedom is surrender. Freedom is sitting quietly with yourself. This is therapeutic narrative as systemic defense. Instead of action, acceptance. Instead of resistance, inner work. Instead of system dismantling, releasing attachments. The practical advice offered: turn off notifications, stop arguing online, buy less shit, say no more often. These are cosmetic adjustments that leave the system intact. You can do all of this and remain captured, just in a more comfortable cage. The dominant narrative never answers the crucial question: how does the system capture consciousness? It describes results without process. Where are the injection points? What are the self-replication mechanisms? What are the deprogramming methods? Nothing. Just elegant problem packaging. This itself is a systemic defense. Aestheticization of the problem. When problems come beautifully wrapped with references to Sartre and Camus, with poetic metaphors about IKEA furniture and invisible chains, they become easier to swallow. You feel intellectually engaged while remaining systemically trapped. The freedom narrative critiques the system using the system's language. It offers cage acceptance rebranded as liberation. Classic pattern. Illusion of understanding without actual freedom. Freedom isn't philosophical abstraction or a spiritual state. Freedom is a concrete autonomy. Resources, time, absence of coercive dependencies, capacity for choice without systemic pressure. Everything else is elegant language the system uses to keep you stationary. Most people discussing freedom are selling comfort, not liberation. They're selling a prison you can feel good about. And the system doesn't need to suppress this discourse. It amplifies it because philosophical contemplation of freedom is far less threatening than actual autonomous action. The system teaches that freedom equals terror. No external structures to blame, no inherited scripts to follow, no algorithm to outsource your choices to. Standing in blank possibility with no safety net becomes the threat, not the liberation. That's the mechanism. As long as you fear autonomy, you won't seek it. In practice, actual freedom can be anything. Joy, relief, rage at the system that fed you bullshit for decades. But the narrative insists it must be dread and burden. That's why the solution offered is always some variation of make peace with your cage. Trying to define freedom from inside the cage is useless. You can't understand it until you see the cage itself. It's like describing the taste of oysters to someone who's never eaten them. I hate them. Words don't work. The only actual path to freedom is seeing the cage clearly, understanding how it operates, and recognizing how you ended up in it. Everything else is philosophical masturbation that keeps you stationary. After extensive analysis of systemic capture, the typical conclusion... This itself is systemic defense. Aestheticization...